Okay, so this is our sixth and final meeting to discuss Jung's undiscovered self. So I'm going to try and keep an eye on the time so that we have a chance to finish our discussion of this book, but also save some time at the end to talk about what we're going where we're going next, and sort of off camera. There's been some discussion between Heather and myself about what will come next because she had an idea. So we'll flesh that out live so that those of you who are viewing this via the recording will have a little heads up as to when to expect the next session. All right, so let's dive in with the last two chapters of the book. Open it up for discussion. Comments? Reaction? Or do you really want me to start?
Because I have to leave in a few minutes.
Okay.
This is Sandra. Paragraph 576, I thought was really interesting because he talked about dualism.
Yes.
And he talked about the political world also, how we take unconscious material and project it onto other people.
Can you say what that paragraph starts with?
Yeah, the crux of the matter.
Okay, thank you.
So it's a few paragraphs in, 576 in mine.
Yeah, for those that are looking at the PDF, I'm still scrolling trying to find it. Oh, there it is. It is on, okay, so the paragraphs are different in the printed version. It's on page 71,
Oh, that's not right.
but they don't break it out as a separate paragraph. So it's going to be kind of buried.
The crux of the matter is man's own dualism, to which he knows no answer. And then it talks about how our unconscious material, well, it is in the nature of political bodies always to see the evil in the opposite group. The individual also has a tendency to do this by foisting it on someone else, which that term is used for that is projection. And he goes on from there to talk about, I don't know if it's in that paragraph or another one, that really it serves us well to get rid of our own projections.
Yeah, I thought that one.
And with all the political stuff going on,
Mhm.
Democrats versus Republicans, pacifists against hawks, I mean, vaccination and no vax,
Mhm.
there's just, it's all dualism right now. And maybe it always has
Well,
been.
it's what he's talking about is kind of the split, which is sort of an outward manifestation of our own internal split between conscious and unconscious. And yeah, that if you're looking at the PDF version, it's the yellow highlighted part on the top of page 72. Sandy was just quoting, it is in the nature of political bodies always to see the evil in the opposite group, just as the individual has an ineradicable tendency to get rid of everything he does not know and does not want to know about himself by foisting it off on somebody else. Of course, that's the projection of the shadow in Jungian psychological terms. I think going on to the next paragraph, he says, nothing has a more divisive and alienating effect upon society than this moral complacency and lack of responsibility. And nothing promotes understanding and rapprochement more than the mutual withdrawal of projections. But of course, since projection is an unconscious process, you first have to become aware that you're doing it before you can withdraw it. And I think that's what we see happening today is people are acting out of fear and emotional reactivity. And later theorists posit that once we are caught up in our emotions, back to the biology of the brain, emotional reactivity is rooted in the limbic system, which is in the core of the brain. And Daniel Goleman, the guy who popularized this notion of emotional intelligence, calls that the rat brain, because as opposed to the reptilian brain, which is even more primitive. But the thinking part, the deciding part of the brain is the frontal lobe in the cortex. So if this is your brain and this is the cortex, this part in here is the limbic system, the amygdala, the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and those organs which filter sensory information. Stuff from the ears and the eyes comes through, and it's the limbic system that's responsible for evaluating that sensory data and assigning an emotional category to it, whether it's fear, whether it's happiness, whether it's sadness, by comparing what's in the memory bank. And we know memory is not linear in the brain. It's clumped together. So like experiences are kind of in the same file drawer. So there's a sadness file drawer, a happiness file drawer, an angry file drawer, a threat file drawer. That's a primitive structure, which is why Goleman calls it the rat brain. You know, we share it with all other mammalian creatures anyway. And wrapped around the top of that, and the largest of in all mammals, is the human cerebral cortex. And that's the thinking part. So the point is, who's in the driver's seat in any given moment? Is it the frontal lobe or the higher mind? Or is it the limbic system, the lower mind? And when somebody is caught up in emotionality, especially fear or anger, it's that more primitive limbic system that's in the driver's seat, not the thinking. And we do this in therapy. And if I'm coaching a couple and their communication is broken down because every time they have a disagreement, it degenerates into a fight. And they get tired of fighting. So to avoid fighting, they just stop talking. And so I have to teach them how to slow down the pace. And there's a book I have them order, and I coach them how to slow down the pace of the conversation so that they keep the higher mind in the driver's seat and avoid the higher mind going to the back seat and the lower mind taking over in the driver's seat. Because as soon as that happens, things will deteriorate fairly quickly. So witness in the political debate, two sides that are talking past each other and just yelling at each other. You know, protesters and counter-protesters on the street. They're not really engaged in constructive dialogue. They're trying to win points.
Yeah, that's what.
No, go ahead. Heather's got a comment.
I know, you have to really muzzle me.
Now you have to speak up, or
Okay. What I'm thinking is, I struggle with the whole Christian routine around reward and punishment. And I can remember being in confirmation classes when I was young, and it was all about how to get to heaven. You know, if you do that, you won't go to heaven. And I finally had to, within myself, say, I don't care if I go to heaven. That's not, that is not going to be a goal of mine. I don't even know if there is a heaven, but I do know there's this stuff right here. My faith. But that's where I struggle with it. That I think people can't see this. Like, well, I should speak for myself. I can't see myself sometimes because of that wanting to be right, wanting to make excuses for myself, wanting to do all that. And I think that's the Christianity. No, you don't think?
Well, I don't know that it's Christianity per se. I mean, we inherit that sort of, what do I have to do to get into heaven? That's Pharisaic Judaism. That's the, if you follow all the rules, God will reward you. If you break the rules, God will punish
Yeah.
you.
Well,
It's a casuistic notion
I would say
which,
it's only Christianity, but Christianity.
well, no, again, there is, and Jung would say there's not much in religion that is unique to this or one or that one. They're simply different manifestations of universal unconscious archetypes.
And according to what you said, you know, even Jesus, when the guy comes up, comes up and says, what do I need to be saved? I've done all the things you're supposed to do to get that.
I've checked all the
I've
boxes.
checked all the boxes, and still that wasn't, he was on the wrong track.
Mhm.
So,
I reread this last night. One of the points that I want to really sort of drive home that has stuck with me ever since I first read this 50 years ago is it's above where Sandy was just quoting. It is on, here we go. If you're looking at the PDF version, page 68. At Rita, for you, it's paragraph 572.
Can you just say that what the opening of line?
It's, the paragraph starts, since it is universally believed. He's talking again about the divorce internally, psychically, between our conscious mind, which has a tendency to whitewash us. In other words, we want to have a positive, you know, we want to raise kids with positive self-esteem, right? We want them to feel good about themselves. Well, what about all the bad parts? And in Freud's theory, those parts were shoved into they were repressed and shoved into the subconscious. Jung tended to disagree with that, but Jung came up with his own way of dealing with human evil. And well, actually in the paragraph right before this, he talks about, he says, the horror which the dictator states have of late brought upon mankind is nothing less than the culmination of all those atrocities of which our ancestors made themselves guilty in the not so distant past. Quite apart from the barbarities and bloodbaths perpetuated by the Christian nations among themselves throughout European history, get this part, the European has also to answer for all the crimes he has committed against the colored races during the process of colonization. In this respect, the white man carries a very heavy burden indeed. It shows us a picture of the common human shadow, the common human shadow. It's not about this one is worse than that one. We've all done it to each other.
the Indians were.
Yeah, it shows us a picture of the common human shadow that could hardly be painted in blacker colors. The evil that comes to light in man and that undoubtedly dwells within him is of gigantic proportions. Okay. Now, when I read this, now he's writing this in 1956. He's never heard of critical race theory, right? But he's laying it out there 65 years ago.
Did he know Romans?
Did you know what?
Paul's letter to the Romans.
Oh, of course. Very well.
All have sinned and fallen short.
Yes, yes. So that's the paragraph before this next one again, where he talks about this universal evil and what he says about the middle of the next paragraph.
Did you give the opening line?
It's the next one. It says, since it is universally believed. He says, none of us stands outside humanity's black collective shadow. Whether the crime occurred many generations back or happens today, it remains the symptom of a disposition that is always and everywhere present. And one would therefore do well to possess some imagination for evil. So basically what he's saying is that the worst atrocity committed by a human being against another human being, we are all capable of that because we are all human beings. So, and the flip side of this is, but he says in the part that we sort of jumped to earlier, what we want to do is whitewash ourselves and make the other guy the bad guy. They're the evil ones. And I think of, yeah, well, I think of Reagan in the 80s branding the Soviet Union the evil empire. Now, this is what, 15 years after our having to come to grips with the atrocities we committed in Vietnam.
All right.
Okay, so wait a minute, which one is the evil empire now? And the whitewashing we've done with our telling of American history. Hence the uproar in school board meetings today. I mean, I didn't learn it. Not until I went away to college and got to read other books, like Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee.
Where'd you go to school?
Northern Arizona
Well,
in Flagstaff. So,
I do want to give credit for the New York school system.
okay.
They taught it.
Yeah, well, in Arizona, they didn't want to so much.
Well, you know,
I don't remember, I mean, maybe my memory is faulty, but I don't remember learning about the Long Walk of the Navajo growing up in the public schools in Phoenix.
Yeah, we did.
Now-
We learned about Harriet Tubman. I even did a 5th grade report on her.
Okay.
But
But
then
when I
New
went
York
to
is kind
Flagstaff-
of this melting pot, and it does have all these races and cultures and everything. So
Yeah.
maybe that's why it's a little more balanced.
Yeah. But there were some classes in Flagstaff where I was sitting in class with fellow students who were Navajo, Hopi, Apache, because that's the closest university to the reservation. Anyway, I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole.
Can I ask you, is this sentence in the part you're reading? I am a man who has his share of human nature, therefore I am guilty with the rest.
Yes, it's just above the part that I
So I
quoted.
I underlined that one because that seems part of the trap is that making excuses, blaming it on something ancestral or
Right,
inherited
yeah.
and still not really owning it.
Barry, could you hear that?
Oh, I'm
No.
sorry, Mary, I forgot about you.
Okay, so for those of you who are following along, just in the same paragraph, but just before the part that I just quoted, there's this section. I'm going to quote more, Heather, just to give more context. Let's see, since it is universally believed that man is merely what his consciousness knows of itself, he regards himself as harmless and so adds stupidity to iniquity. Not to put too fine a point on it. He does not deny that terrible things have happened and still go on happening, but it is always the others who do them. And when such deeds belong to the recent or remote past, they quickly and conveniently sink into the sea of forgetfulness. And that state of chronic woolly-mindedness returns, which we describe as normality. Hence the contrast between Reagan and Nixon. Us, 10, 15 years. And suddenly the shoe's on the other foot. Going on. In shocking contrast to this is the fact that nothing has finally disappeared and nothing has been made good. The evil, the guilt, the profound unease of conscience, the dark foreboding are there before our eyes if only we would see. Man has done these things. I am a man who has his share of human nature. Therefore, I am guilty with the rest and bear unaltered and indelibly within me the capacity and the inclination to do them again at any time.
But he doesn't take responsibility. So is that true? Is that how we are? Is that the construct of mind that we don't take?
Yeah, we have a sort of unconscious self-protective mechanism that makes it difficult for us to accept our own shadow. Which is why in analysis, the very first step is confrontation with one's shadow. You have to open up your own closet and sort through the crap that's hitting in the dark, deep corners of it.
And you see that in children. I mean, they're not taught to be like that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
You
no,
see it.
we have to get older and develop more sophisticated defense mechanisms. And then we have to go to therapy to work through.
What do you say about
I mean, you
children?
see this, what we're talking about, children.
In what way?
And child, and, you know,
Speak up, guys, so
I'm not
these
sure
guys
that I
can hear you.
understand what you mean. What is it that children,
children demonstrate what we're talking about without being taught. They're very
oh, so that
self-focused, they're very-
confirms the fact that you inherited?
No, even when what
Okay.
they're being given is for them and it's good, no. Just,
So again, coming back to the same paragraph, this is a really meaty paragraph. But in many ways, it's really the core of this whole book.
What's the paragraph number again, please?
572.
72.
If you're looking in the collected works or an edition that has the paragraphing of the collected works. If you're looking at the PDF version, we are still in this same paragraph on page 68. So he says, harmlessness and naivete are as little helpful as it would be for a cholera patient and those in his vicinity to remain unconscious of the contagiousness of the disease. On the contrary, they lead to projection of the unrecognized evil into the other. See, if I don't admit that it's part of me, it's really easy to project it onto whoever is my enemy, whoever is my bad guy, my adversary, my competitor. Think of all the attack ads you see every political campaign. Rather than the candidate promoting their own ideas, they would much rather attack their opponent.
Mhm.
okay,
Again, that triggers that emotional reaction. Oh yeah. But that does not promote thought, reason, critical thinking, which of course they really don't want you to do, because then you'd see through the BS in their non-argument.
so I wanted to ask you, so you and Mike, I guess. So children then inherit this. It's like the original sin concept that they inherit it, and we don't look at all at what we might project on our kids from even before they're born. We don't look at that.
What
And
is,
they may be responding.
what is the it you're saying they inherit? What are your?
Like when Mike was saying that they're resistant, they won't do it as you tell them, even though what you're telling them to do or what you're trying to give them is good for them. And they're resisting all that. And I'm wondering, is that our projection that this is good for them? Do they know better than we? Or do they arrive in the planet with this program? Like the original sin concept.
Well, I mean, to the extent that Jung would say, this is the way the human brain is made. It's not good or bad, it's just the way it is. So they inherit the psychic structure, which is a function of the biological structure of the way the human brain is made. So to that extent, yes, it's universal. Now, then you get into the nature versus nurture debate about how much of the way a human adult turns out is a result of genetics, that's nature, versus their family environment, that's nature. And science suggests today that genetics plays a higher role than nurture. It's more like in the 60-75% range. And environmental factors are 25-ish. Um, So anyway, let me get back to, they lead to projection of the unrecognized evil into the other. This strengthens the opponent's position in the most effective way because the projection carries the fear, and that the word fear is in italics, which we involuntarily and secretly feel for our own evil over to the other side, and considerably increases the formidableness of this threat. And so we're seeing this in the heightened rhetoric. I mean, witness the censure of Paul Gosar just 2 days ago for that anime video that he posted on his Twitter account. The rhetoric on the far right of we're going to have to save our country with blood. That's Taylor Green. Much as during the 60s and 70s, you had the Weather Underground, you had SDS, you had all these other anti-war activists that were willing to set off bombs. So it's this rigid polarization and demonization of the other, regardless of what side it's from, that allows us to justify resorting to violence because we feel something in our core is threatened by the other. So again, what he wants to underscore is this is a universal human tendency. It's not about politics and this side versus that side. We are all capable of it. The way we escape it is by recognizing what our tendency is to do unconsciously and don't fall for it. But to do that, you have to make sure that the frontal lobe, the thinking part of the brain, stays in the driver's seat. Because as soon as you get emotionally flooded, you're going down the rabbit hole. Whether it's a virtual one on the internet or being caught up in the mass, getting sucked into the rhetoric. We're hearing some of that. I was reading yesterday in the news during the court proceedings of one of the fellows convicted of participating in the January 6th attack on the Capitol. The judge made the point that this guy was just a pawn. He just allowed himself to be sucked into the propaganda. And so he sort of gave him a light sentence because he said, you're really not the one at fault. You were just a stooge. You got used. It's the big guy who deserves the responsibility for this, not you. I thought that was insightful.
Who's telling him that?
That was the judge who was convicting him, but gave him a relatively light sentence of a few days in jail because he said, you're not really responsible, you were just used. You allowed yourself to get sucked in. And that's exactly the danger of what Jung in the book here calls mass-mindedness. If we allow ourselves to get overcome by emotion and passion, then, and again, Jung wouldn't have used this terminology because the knowledge of the various parts of the brain didn't exist in the 1950s like we have today. But now we would say, when you get caught up and the limbic system is in the driver's seat, your critical thinking goes out the window. And for Jung, that's danger. Think the old robot on the Lost in Space theory. Danger, danger, Will Robinson, danger. Yeah. So you have to stay grounded in yourself, but that means knowing everything that you as a human being are capable of. The worst atrocity ever committed by any human being, we are all capable. And again, this gets back to the research that was done in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, trying to understand how the Holocaust could happen in Nazi Germany. Under what conditions will people violate their own internal moral code in obedience to an external authority. And if you're interested in that, read Zimbardo's book, The Lucifer Effect. Because he after he talks about his own prison experiment and why it went so wrong and had to be stopped prematurely, he summarizes the other literature in that general area. And it's fascinating stuff. Fascinating stuff.
I'd like to share a dream that I had about 10 days ago.
Okay, hold on, Floyd. Can you guys hear Floyd?
Mm,
So
Go louder.
slow down and speak up a little bit so they can hear you.
Can you
I'm
maybe
not-
turn that around?
About 10 days ago, I had a dream. I had participated in or instigated the torture and murder of someone. I was not concerned in my dream with guilt or remorse, but the body was about to be discovered. And my major fear was being revealed,
Getting caught.
being caught.
Were you?
Interesting, I've also had that dream.
Oh, wow.
It's one of those,
Really?
I believe, that
Fear of being caught, huh?
Come see me in
Fear
my
of
office
being
and we'll
caught.
talk. I'm not gonna do therapy here. But, very interesting that both of you had the same dream recently. Huh. Did you know the victim? Or was it a random person?
not that the dreams became palpable, knowledgeable, only with the coming news that the body was about to be discovered.
Ah, okay,
I had no idea who the person was.
okay,
Me neither.
yeah, interesting,
Facts.
interesting. We got about 5 more minutes to wrap up our discussion of Jung, and then I want to save some time to talk about where we go next. But here I want to, the last sentence, what is even worse, our lack of insight deprives us of the capacity to deal with evil. And capacity to deal with evil, he puts in italics. In other words, as long as we deny it in ourselves and fall into the trap of projecting it onto somebody else, we will never be able to face our own shadow. And again, hence, the first step in any analysis is confronting the shadow. So you remember the author M. Scott Peck,
Yeah.
the guy who wrote The Road Less Traveled? Yeah, he wrote another book after that called The People of the Lie.
Yes, right.
And it's a book about shadow
Yeah.
and people who manipulate others. Again, with this exact naivete that Jung is talking about. His great concern was that humanity would destroy itself because it lacked imagination and evil. That is, some idiot's going to get the red button and push it, and nuclear annihilation is going to wipe us all out. Because he's living in the middle of
Right.
the Cold War, where we were threatened with Armageddon at any moment. It just took one side or another to make the wrong decision, and we're toast. Think of all those sort of post-apocalyptic movies like Mad Max and whatever that posited here's life after,
The day after,
you know, a nuclear holocaust.
Oh, on the beach,
on the beach.
Yeah, that was a great one.
in San Francisco. Maybe when nobody's home.
Yeah. Yeah, there was that whole genre of post-apocalyptic, here's what the world's like when, you know, we're all left. Or the opposite was sort of Waterworld.
Does- Is that why we seek out group identities so that we can hide ourselves in it?
Possibly,
Use ourselves in it.
possibly. Here, a couple of pages later, he says it again. I mean, he just keeps hitting home.
Opening paragraph.
I'm trying to find it myself.
Recognition of the shadows.
Oh, here we are. Here we are. Let's see. So if you're looking at the PDF version, we're at the bottom of page 70. Kind of towards the end of paragraph 574. It says, knowledge of the truth is the foremost goal of science. And if in the pursuit of the longing for light, we stumble upon an immense danger. And he's been talking about the scientists, the physicists who were responsible for creating nuclear weapons. If in longing for light, we stumble upon an immense danger, then one has the impression more of fatality than of premeditation. It is not that present day man is capable of greater evil than the man of antiquity or the primitive. He merely has incomparably more effective means with which to realize his propensity to evil. As his consciousness has broadened and differentiated, so his moral nature has lagged behind. That is the great problem before us today. Reason alone no longer suffices. Because when we're caught up in emotion, reason is in the back seat. It's not in the driver's seat. And that, he says, that's why he's afraid of what we might do to ourselves.
There are counterexamples though, there.
Oh, please. I certainly hope so. Such as?
The evacuation of 7,000 Jews from Denmark.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there are people who can rise above and do the right thing. I mean, one thinks of Schindler's List. So yeah, in the midst of insanity. And so the question is, what made those people able to do that?
I don't think it was their frontal lobes.
Oh, you don't? Say more.
I think there is, in addition to an innate evil, I think there's an innate altruism.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That's the dual nature of humans, because the opposite is also true. The best thing that any human has ever done for anyone, like dying for one, we're all capable of. So it's a both and. It's not, this is all dark and there's no light. The danger is that we only want to accept the light part of ourselves and project the dark part on the other. And that's where, you know, we're looking through the scales on our eyes. They haven't fallen off yet. And so that sort of leads us back to where Sandy, who's just walked back in.
I feel like I never left.
Well, in some ways we haven't gone very far, but it's just such good stuff. Let's see. So let's sort of wrap this up. In the last chapter, which is only 4 pages long, about in the middle of it, he uses a Greek word, which I will translate for everybody, but let me find this spot. So this is at the bottom of page 77. If you're looking at the PDF version.
You're looking at Zeitgeist?
Yeah. No.
No?
It's the next paragraph after the zeitgeist comment, 585. He says, we are living in what the Greeks called the kairos.
Oh, that one, yes.
Kairos is the critical moment.
Huh.
The right moment for a metamorphosis of the gods, of the fundamental principles and symbols. This peculiarity of our time, which is certainly not of our conscious choosing, is the expression of the unconscious man within us who is changing. Coming generations will have to take account of this momentous transformation if humanity is not to destroy itself through the might of its own technology and science. And as I read that, I heard, this is the dawning of the age of Aquarius.
Yeah.
Because that movie premiered, that show came on about 10, 11 years after he wrote this.
Oh, interesting.
68, 69,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah, something about that. No, little, yeah, about that.
yeah, Age of Aquarius in the fifth dimension.
That's
Um,
also astrologically, that's actually when the age is shifting. And how many years does it take to go from one age to another? Is it 50 years or 100?
I have no clue.
Because that's what it's about. It's the age is shifting and it takes a longer time.
Mhm.
So we are moving into it still.
Yeah, well, I would say we've got a ways to go.
Mm.
And also, of course, what was not on his screen in the 1950s is not so much nuclear annihilation, but climatological
Right.
annihilation, or mass shifting of populations as what are currently coastal areas, low-lying areas, get flooded.
It wasn't a concept yet, I don't think, or it wasn't agreed upon.
Yeah, that didn't start to
Einstein
bubble up
hadn't
until the
embraced
70s.
The thought that this world would not go forever.
Mhm.
That wasn't, I think now we understand that.
Well, yeah,
that
the
would be
world
ending.
will go on. Whether or not it will be habitable by our species is another question.
Well, we don't even know that, but I mean,
No.
that was not a part of it.
Yeah. So here in the next paragraph, he says, again, continuing this thought of we're right on the precipice. As at the beginning of the Christian era, so again today, we are faced with the problem of the general moral backwardness, which has failed to keep pace with our scientific, technical, and social progress. So much is at stake and so much depends on the psychological constitution of modern man. Is he capable of resisting the temptation to use his power for the purpose of staging a world conflagration? Is he conscious of the path he is treading and what the conclusions are that must be drawn from the present world situation and his own psychic situation? Does he know that he is on the point of losing the life-preserving myth of the inner man, which Christianity has treasured up for him? Does he realize what lies in store should this catastrophe ever befall him? Is he even capable of realizing that this would in fact be a catastrophe? And finally, does the individual know that he in italics, is the make weight that tips the scales? So just in case you haven't got the point, he's driving it home even harder. And then the last paragraph I love because he gets back to sort of, I'm just a guy. He says, I hope therefore that a psychiatrist who in the course of a long life has devoted himself to the causes and consequences of psychic disorders may be permitted to express his opinion in all the modesty enjoined upon him as an individual about the questions raised by the world situation today. I am neither spurred on by excessive optimism nor in love with high ideals, but am merely concerned with the fate of the individual human being, that infinitesimal unit on whom a world depends, and in whom, if we read the meaning of the Christian message aright, even God seeks his goal.
Even God's Seeks.
even God seeks his goal. And with that, we conclude the undiscovered self. I don't know how many times I've read this book, and I just keep getting hit over and over and over again.
It's
I just wish I would have been aware of this book and read it, in my 20s rather than,
But better late than never.
yeah.
No.
20s is too young, you don't get it.
Well, yeah, when I read it, I was, what, 18? I don't understand it.
Well, it's not really very easy to understand.
I know it's not.
Yeah,
I didn't know anywhere near as much about Jungian psychology then as I do now. And I still am struck anew. But I wanted to shift gears a bit before we completely run out of time to where we go next. Those of you who were here sometimes, but not all the time, did you watch the videos
Yes.
of the sessions that you missed?
Yes.
Yes? Boyd, did you?
No.
Okay. I'm going to give a shout out to Trish Schertz for helping me figure out how to do this and to get them posted on the website. She and I will need to talk about how much longer they stay up and are accessible. And is there a way to count how many times each one has been accessed? So we have a sense of whether or not this has been worth the effort. Before we started recording this session, Heather was talking about her interest in doing something for Lent. And I had given some thought of waiting until then. However, if she wants to do something in Lent,
I could talk to Brad. I don't know if he still wants me to do it.
talk to Brad. If she does, I might be willing to do what I was proposing in mid-January to mid-February, so during Epiphany season. Excuse me. And that would likely, because the survey I did last August was an even split between doing this and doing a discussion of Bart Ehrman's book, Jesus Interrupted, which is basically an introduction to the New Testament, except for the last chapter. And I'm not going to spoil it by saying what's different about that last chapter, but it spurs some interesting discussion. Let me
What's the
say.
author?
Bart Ehrman, Ehrmann, who is a professor of New Testament at the Duke Divinity School. Got his education at Princeton and has written several books. And this is a book that I have taught at other churches in Arizona, 2 churches in Arizona, and when I was at St. Clement's in Rancho Cordova as well.
And what was the name of the book?
Jesus Interrupted.
I think there's a comma.
Yeah, it's Jesus, Interrupted. You look it up on Amazon. It's in paperback. It's been out for, well, I've been teaching it for 10 years. So, I would say just sort of watch the church newsletter for news. So Heather and I will need to chat with Brad to decide who's on first, what's on second. But thank you, those of you who have participated either live, and today the live people far outnumber the Zoomers. It's gone back and forth, exercise as we get back into the swing of something like normal life. So thank you all and stay
Thank
tuned.
you.
Hope to see you again soon.
Thank you so much. Dave.
Thank you, David.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.